Singapore's general election 2025 is underway, and as expected, some sample counts have already been released. But just how accurate are these early numbers? Are they still as reliable as in previous years, or have a few constituencies surprised us this time around? In this video, we'll break down what sample counts really are, why they're generally trusted, and where things may not have lined up during GE 2025. If you're someone who checks the sample count and calls it a night, you might want to stay with us till the end. So why are these sample counts so accurate? Well, here's the thing. It's all about statistics. You might think that 100 ballots from each polling station might not give us much, but here's where it gets interesting. The key is how the sample count is weighted. Each polling station is different in terms of voter turnout, so the 100 selected ballots are adjusted according to how many people voted in that station. This helps ensure that the sample reflects the broader voting patterns across the entire constituency. Here's where it gets even cooler. Statisticians have figured out a formula for this. And while I'm not a research scientist, and let's face it, neither are most of us, the system works because of a principle called the margin of error. Typically, sample counts are accurate within a 4% margin. That means if a sample shows that a party has 54% of the vote, the final result will likely fall between 50% and 58%. This is why sample counts are so reliable. In fact, they're right 95 times out of 100. That's a pretty good track record when you think about it. However, there's always a little wiggle room, just like with anything that involves predictions. While the sample count is almost always spot on, sometimes, as we saw in GE 2020, the final result can differ by a few percentage points. That's because sample counts, while precise, are still only estimates based on a small portion of the vote. So why are sample counts considered so accurate? At first glance, it may seem like magic. Those early results come in, and they usually line up pretty closely with the final count. But the truth is, there's a lot of math behind it. It all starts with the fact that you're looking at a snapshot, just 100 votes per polling station. But here's the key. The system works by multiplying that small sample across multiple polling stations, sometimes even hundreds of them. Each polling station is a small representation of the entire constituency, and when you combine them, you get a very reliable picture of the overall voting trends. This is where statistics come in. Statisticians use something called the margin of error to predict how close the sample count will be to the final result. In Singapore, sample counts are usually accurate within a 4% margin. So, for example, if the sample count shows Party A with 54% of the vote, the final result is likely to be between 50% and 58%. This is why when we see those early results, they tend to align so well with the final vote tally. It gets even better. Sample counts are considered 95% accurate. This means that in 95 out of 100 elections, the result from the sample count will fall within that small margin. It's the same principle used in consumer surveys and TV ratings. A small sample, when selected properly, can give a pretty good indication of the larger trend. But as with any system, there are always exceptions. Even though sample counts are designed to be as precise as possible, there are instances where things don't go according to plan. And this is where things get interesting for GE 2025. Now let's take a look at some constituencies where the sample count wasn't quite as accurate as expected. In previous elections like GE 2020, we saw a few SMCs, single-member constituencies, where the sample count didn't quite match the final results. For example, in Kebun SMC, the sample count showed 68% for the PAP, but the final result was 62.97%, a difference of over 5%. Similarly, Pioneer SMC had a sample count of 66% for PAP, but the actual result was 61.98%, and Punggol West SMC saw a similar discrepancy. These discrepancies weren't huge, but they were enough to raise some eyebrows. So it's worth asking, what caused these differences, and could the same thing happen in GE 2025? GE 2025, what could be different? As we approach GE 2025, we have to consider a few key factors that could influence the accuracy of sample counts, even though the system is highly reliable. Below are the details of why certain races might present challenges and why discrepancies may occur. 1. Tight races and narrow margins. In elections where races are very close, the margin of error in sample counts becomes more significant. Let's say in an SMC, single-member constituency, a party is shown to have 51% of the sample count with a 4% margin of error. That means the actual results could swing anywhere from 47% to 55%. When the competition is this close, even small shifts in voter sentiment can cause the final result to diverge from the sample count. The sample count's margin of error becomes much more noticeable in tightly contested constituencies, where only a small percentage of votes determine the outcome. Why does this happen? In Singapore's multi-constituency system, some constituencies, particularly SMCs, have smaller voter bases compared to larger GRCs, group representation constituencies. This means that the sample count data from a small pool of voters could have a slightly higher degree of variability. Therefore, for closely contested SMCs, sample counts might not always reflect the final result as accurately as they would in a larger GRC, where the sample size is proportionately bigger and the result is therefore more stable. 2. Changes in voter demographics. Voter behavior in any election can be influenced by demographic shifts. These shifts could be due to factors like population growth and migration. If more young voters or voters from certain demographic groups participate in GE2025 compared to previous elections, this could influence the outcome in ways that aren't captured in the early sample counts. For instance, a surge in first-time voters or a new wave of immigrant voters might lean toward a specific party, but the sample count might not fully account for this new voting behavior. Changes in voter turnout. In some elections, voter turnout can vary depending on political engagement, public sentiment, or current events. If turnout is particularly high or low in certain regions, this can affect the accuracy of sample counts. For example, if more people from a certain demographic group vote in a particular area, it might skew the sample count results before the final tally, especially if that demographic group votes predominantly for one party. Shifts in issues and campaigns. Over time, political issues and public concerns change. In GE 2025, new social or economic concerns, such as housing affordability or healthcare, could lead to significant shifts in voting patterns compared to previous elections. Sample counts might not fully capture how much these newer issues have impacted voter decisions in a specific region, especially if those issues are just emerging or gaining traction close to election day. Number 3, real-time events affecting voter behavior. In the run-up to election day, there's always the potential for major events to shape public opinion. These events can range from news stories to controversies, debates, or even political scandals that break right before the polls open. This is where the real-time dynamics of the election can significantly affect voter behavior. For example, a political scandal. If a politician or a party is involved in a scandal just days before the election, it could change the way voters in certain constituencies cast their ballots. This could influence the results in the final count and create a larger discrepancy from the early sample count. Last-minute campaign efforts. If one party has a strong final push with a successful campaign event, or if a major endorsement comes through at the last minute, this could sway voters' decisions in the final hours before they cast their votes. Again, sample counts, which are based on ballots collected early in the process, may not capture this sudden change in voter sentiment. Shifts in national sentiment. Even broader shifts in national sentiment or global events, e.g. a major economic downturn or international crises that happen close to election time, could shift how voters make their decisions. A last-minute shift in voter behavior could influence final outcomes in specific constituencies. How does this impact sample counts? Given these factors, the accuracy of sample counts can be challenged in these ways. Larger margin of error in smaller constituencies. As mentioned, SMCs with smaller voter bases are more susceptible to a higher degree of variability. The sample count's margin of error in SMCs could become more pronounced, and you could see the final results diverging more significantly than in larger GRCs. Unaccounted shifts in voting trends. If GE 2025 witnesses major shifts in voter demographics or real-time events that influence voter decisions at the last minute, the sample count might not fully reflect these changes, leading to discrepancies in the final results. Dynamic and evolving campaigns. With political campaigns becoming more aggressive and creative in the digital age, new campaign strategies could emerge close to Election Day. These could have an unexpected impact on the final results, especially if they resonate more with certain groups or regions, causing the sample count to diverge from the eventual tally. Wrapping up, understanding these factors is key to interpreting sample counts, particularly in closely contested elections like GE 2025. While sample counts are highly reliable, they are not flawless. Small shifts in voter behavior, demographic changes, or real-time events can cause discrepancies between the early results and the final count. By understanding the reasons behind these potential discrepancies, we can be more prepared to interpret the sample count data as part of a bigger picture rather than relying on it as a completely accurate predictor of the final election outcome.